Welcome, everyone. This morning, Tanya's in an all-day business meeting. For whatever reason, Larissa decided to run Nico off by scheduling him something in parallel with this, so he's not with us. So we're sort of in the home stretch here, and just to give you a little heads up, I'm going to finish up this section, and then I'm going to do a module I've never done before. I created just for this group. That's a kind of a review module. I think it's useful to go back over. And so I think today we'll be mostly working through the rest of the work with these online tools. On the screen, and this is what they look like, or the ones that I did, what they look like, where you explain the why the behavior is important, and try and explain in a context of usefulness, and then the standard that you would judge it against, and then the benchmarking, then the comments. So to me, I think probably one of the most startling discoveries ever made is going to be in the next slide, because I made this tool. Actually, the truth of the matter, let me just tell you the whole truth. I was working as a consultant for a company that valued my experience very much, and they had a proposal team proposing for a $10 billion bid. Now, $10 billion is a lot of money to anybody. And so they asked me to go work with this team, and it was broken, and I didn't like doing it. I kept going back only because the client was somebody I was fond of and important to me. And as I got into it more and more, what I saw was that the leader of the main team, my client's team, was someone who, to use the colloquial expression, shines up and shits down, and nobody could see how toxic the guy was. And the team that they were bad-mouthing all the time, the subordinate team, was the key to winning the competition. This happens fairly often, where you have a proposal where it's for some kind of an exotic space measuring device, that would be or sensing device. And the main company was the prime contractor, big company, built spacecraft systems, and they teamed up with a smaller company that had the competitive edge in the gadget, the instrument that was going to make the thing. So I decided that I went to at that time I was able to go and visit the CEO. In fact, every trip I went on, she insisted I come in and meet with her. So I'd go out there with them 2-3 days a month. Then my last meeting would be with her, and I'd sort of tell her what I'm thinking about things. And what was fun is that a lot of what I told her were messages that clients asked me to give her that they couldn't hear from her, but they could hear from me. So we began a really close relationship, and I said, the only way you're going to win this is to get rid of your guy. He's the problem. I know you don't see it that way because he puts on a face for you, and the guy that they're bad-mouthing is a good guy. So she said, well, let me think about it, and she didn't do anything. And I realized it's one thing to change out. They did a lot of, believe it or not, they did a lot of personnel change outs on my recommendation, but it was typically because of a color mismatch. And they could understand that, and they could explain that to the people. And the people they were changing out understood it, and they didn't object. But to change somebody out on a consultant say so because they're not performing when they have no evidence, that was a stronger push. So I got the idea. I made these circular things with at that time there were 12 behaviors, but it doesn't matter. The 8 behaviors, I'll call it the 8. And I was thinking about what to do. And at that time, the customer was grading their proposal as blue, green, yellow, or red, depending on the quality of what they saw. So I gave everybody crayons, and I said, go to each of the behaviors, and there's in that circle, color it in, that wedge, that little wedge for that behavior, the color. And I said, do one for yourself and put your name on it, and put down your team affiliation. There were 2 teams. Do one for the leader of the other team, and do one for the leader of the main team. And so I gathered these up, and I took the data and I put them in histograms. And what I showed her was that even the people that were part of the home team, the main team, disliked their own manager much more than they disliked the guy that was being badmouthed all the time. I said, this guy's got to go. So what I realized was it's an orange culture, need data, so I gave him data. She acted on it, they removed the guy, and they won the job. So all happy. So I'm thinking about this, and I thought, this behavioral measurement is a useful thing, and I built an online tool. And I came home and called the guy in Boulder, I think for $10,000. He put this into a software system. This one was probably a lot harder to do than today because the software was more primitive. And we could assess people's behaviors against these standards. So anyway, I'm doing this. And the reason that I wanted to do it was I wanted to see what was the relative efficacy of the three things we were doing, which was the workshops, the coaching, which everybody had at that time, and parenthetically, the tool, which I didn't think was going to do anything. So one of the first things that happened with the tool was that a coach, I had at that time 8 coaches working for me, and one of their friends heard about this and said, can I use your tool? I've got a client that I can't remedy. What's the matter? I said, sure, go ahead and use it for free. So he used it and found out the person was habituated to drama, which he didn't see because, once again, it didn't show up in coaching sessions. So he remedied that, and she got the big job. Everybody's happy. Meanwhile, I'm using this on teams and individuals. So at this time, I had a big NASA contract, and the rules were that every team did a team assessment before we did a workshop, because I learned about the 7 deadly sins. And every individual got a individual assessment before the workshop and got assigned a coach. So anyway, that's where we were. We're doing this work. And I mentioned this the other day. I think that I discovered that the thing works best when it's necessary. The team leader endorses all the work. So I had them brief the report. And it's action learning. I picked this up from a friend of mine this term, but it's full of things you can do. So this is probably one of the best parts of it. It's actionable. That's why it's not really an assessment. If you look at your typical organizational assessment, nothing comes out of it that's actionable. It's usually for upper management to muse about why things is happening. So the teams take action, and the team leader can assign action items, which I really can't. Then I discovered that teams that benchmarked in the bottom quintile were essentially broken. They were so broken a workshop didn't help. So I talked with my online guys, the 8 guys that were working on the field, and we had a telecon about this and found there were about half a dozen common things that caused this. Now, I've talked a little bit about this, but I think it doesn't hurt to repeat. I had an interesting case where I had a guy that was a vice president of different aerospace company, and he said the project manager is incompetent. We got to get rid of him. The team's doing badly. So I said, okay, let me make a measurement. Let me just see how the IDA turns out. So we did it, and the IDA was fine. So I said, well, I need you to help the team. I said, nothing wrong with this guy. So let's do a team measurement. And so in the bottom quintile, so I'm beginning to get the hang of this, and I said, tell me what's going on. And they said, well, the biggest problem is that we low bid this, as we usually do. It's a new customer, our first customer in the military. And we lowballed it like we normally do. And then the vice president, the same one that called me, cut their price in half before the proposal went out. So we've got about 1/4 as much money as it takes to do the job. And I looked at that and said, I get the problem. Everyone beats up on you constantly, your own management, the customer. It's just a big, whack-a-mole with you guys for something you didn't cause. I said, the only remedy to this is to go get more money, and I can tell you how to do this. You make a 4D request. And they said, well, the project might get canceled. I said, yeah, it might, but your choice is to continue through this purgatory or do something else. And if it were me, I wouldn't want to work in this environment, harmful to your long-term health. Anyway, so I discovered that when you have these things, you can lay the list of the 7 deadly sins, and you can take the ones from the book and modify them to match your business. It could be 6, it doesn't matter. Put them in front of the project team leader. I did this probably a couple dozen times and said which ones are in play, and they could tell you. Then you could ask, why didn't you do anything? Well, sun's in my eyes, I'm too busy, whatever. You can work as a consultant to remedy these things. And then once that's fixed, you can measure again, they're going to be higher. Now you can do the thing. So that was an interesting finding I didn't expect. And secondly, they can decide at this time if they're individuals they want to do IDAs and coaching with. And probably I'd recommend this for the principals, the people who are most influential, the technical and hierarchical leaders. And this would be the first time at the end of this workshop, that end of this briefing, that I asked them about a workshop or not. So how do you get people to do workshops? I never was easy in convincing people to go away for 3 days on my say-so. Once they see they've got something that makes very deep logical sense, easy to understand, data, they want a workshop. So that's the basic idea. And I asked them also to decide together to redo this. So here came the big aha. So one of my guys, a guy named Skip Borst, said he wanted to do this analysis. He was kind of like my VP. And I said, Skip, I think it's a waste of money. What he wanted to know was what was the influence of the online tool by itself on people's behavior. And I didn't believe there was going to be any. I did not understand it as a change agent tool. So he explained to me, he said, at that time we had roughly 200 teams, I'm going to round it off, had multiple team development assessments. And so he said, I broke them into, I like this idea of the quintiles, kind of the estimate of the precision of the measurement. So I took the 40 teams that were in the bottom quintile. And by the way, this diamond is not centered. That's real data. It just happens to be, that's how that team worked out. If you did a couple hundred teams, it would be in the center of this thing. And so then he said, what happened when they applied the tool each time? 15 minutes online to answer 10 questions. But by the way, the questions are the 8 behaviors, then the plus delta questions. Plus, what would help this team function better? Or no, plus is what this team's doing well. And I tell people, take those things and edit them, put them on the wall of your conference room. When you feel shitty, you can look at what you're doing well. And delta, what are the things we could change to make things better? So 10 questions, about a minute to minute and a half each, takes 10, 15 minutes to do it. As you're doing it repetitively, it becomes faster and faster. And then about an hour, 90 minutes to brief it. So he said, this is what happened every time they redid this process, roughly quarterly. I was astounded. I could not believe this. And so if this was a bottom quintile team, what it meant was the workshops, by now I'd gotten smart, the workshops were happening in here. I don't workshop these people. Consulting did this first leap, fixed their 7 deadly sins. Then they went up like this. I said, that's astounding. I'm flabbergasted. I said, wait a minute. There's no room over here. I don't know statistically, but I think they can't go here. There's no space. So maybe there's some kind of random walk. They're coming up here. And he said, no, I did the teams that started in this quintile, the 40 teams here. Here's what happened to these. The teams that started in this quintile, the teams that started in this quintile, and the 40 teams up here. I was in total shock. I could not imagine. And by the way, what do these numbers mean in terms of performance? I think they scale more or less linearly. I think that a 7% improvement on average every time you do this is a 7% improvement in efficiency, work environment, customer acceptance, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I can't prove that. I don't have any way to make those measurements without what's called confounding variables. All kinds of things affect these. So just cut it in half if you want, or cut it in a quarter if you want. And I calculate the ROI on this. If you take it for an aerospace team in the average range here, it's about 5,000%. So how are your 401ks doing? So when I saw this, I said, this is a profound result. And that day, I made two decisions. The first one was to start writing the book, which Wiley published a year later. And the second was to make all the intellectual property free. I said, anything that can be this potent is it's not owned by me, it's owned by the world. Anything that can make life this much better for people so simply and so easily. So there we are. Comments or thoughts?
It's a powerful tool, Charlie. What can I say? And kudos to you for really, you're like Elon Musk also decided to really put all his findings and
Yeah,
different
you're right.
designs. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's just
all Tesla patents are open source.
yeah, it's open
Yeah,
source.
yeah,
So
same
kudos
thing.
to those leaders like yourself
Yeah.
who realize that it's just really benefiting the humanity and releasing it for open source. That
From my perspective, the knowledge, right? And I think I didn't realize about Tesla, but the knowledge, the intellectual property is powerful, but people have to use it, and that's where the true value of the coach or the the application comes in. So yeah, I think it's it's a powerful tool. I intend to use it more and more, but it does show me that there's still a role for people to help others implement these things, and that's where there's a real opportunity.
yeah,
You
and I'm
know,
just hoping that this will again be available through maybe some provider
you can
online.
definitely get it from Paul Hawkins.
Paul Hawkins,
Yeah,
yeah.
he has it working. So let's just talk about the online tool. The guy that spent 12 years, got paid a ton of money to develop it, promised me he'd always be there for me. Don't worry, always be there. The day my budget started to shrink because my contract dwindled, he left.
Oh,
And yeah, so and there I am with this gigantic software system that evolved over 12 years. And what happened is that a lot of the work was NASA clients. Then I've got 8 people in the field managing this. Everybody came up with some new bell and whistle they wanted on it. Like they wanted it to be able to schedule when it starts and stops, and they wanted it to be able to deal with merging and demerging a team. So the software got more and more and more complex. And the problem was it was costing me $300 a month to host it on a server. But the bigger problem was people would call me up when they had problems with it and ask me to fix it. And I had no idea how to fix it. I've never coded C++, and even if I did, it would take weeks to go in here and understand how to find these little glitches, and a bunch of them were transient. So if you're going to do software repairs, the worst thing is a non-repeating problem. It doesn't work, and then a lot of it because the users didn't use it right. So how do you find that? So I finally people weren't paying me that were using it, so I just shut it down. And the next thing happened was that Gerald in Germany promised to have a replacement system online before the middle of 2019, and I was going to keep this up until his worked. So we had a summit meeting in Germany in December, including reviewing his work. And the guy had, for whatever reason, changed it. And Gerald had not been actively managing this guy very well. So that went into a ditch, went away. So now I've taken down the other. Gerald's burned and crashed and burned, and apparently going to sue the guy. I don't know what's happening with that. Then along comes other people that said they're going to do it. And most notably, my friend from Dominican Republic, you know him, Larissa.
Yeah, I've met him as well.
Yeah,
you mean Hector?
Hector
Yes,
said he
Hector.
would do it, and got a guy that's a wizard, and we had several conversations, and he's promised it's going to be done in a month, and yeah. Well, it went away. friends of mine in China have done it in Chinese, but I told them that if they could do it in English, I don't know in the current environment how much Americans would be wanting to use this thing on a Chinese platform. So she has a son in the US who's also a computer wizard. I said, if you could host it on a server in the US and put it in English, I think that would be something that people could use. I never heard back from her. So, by the way, it's probably worth talking about China for a minute, because this decision to make this available is what opened up China for me. So what happened is I got a call one day from a guy at China Aerospace, a young new PhD had been asked to find leadership program for China Aerospace. And he found my book and read it. And of course, because it's aerospace based, it appealed to him. They flew me over, and I had a bunch of speeches all around their various facilities. And and then the publisher got interested in my book over there, went back for my second trip, and I met with the publisher, and the China Aerospace guy, Dr. Mao, took me over there. And there were people in the room who were already doing 4D workshops. And the reason was they had found my website and they're downloading the stuff and using it, which thrilled me to no end. So that ended up being my biggest client base. And I think the main reason is that I made all the IP free. They told me most Westerners, professors, would do classes and wouldn't give away any written materials. So people ask me, every time I told someone I'm doing a lot of work in China, they said, oh, you can't do that. They'll steal your material. I said, they can't steal it. I said, how do you prevent it? I said, I give it away. So I think at least 100,000 people have done 4D work in China. Maybe, probably more. I did workshops with China Telecom with 1 million employees. I mean, think about that, 1 million employees. So anyway, meanwhile, what I have done is I've made a Word document, and it's you can send it out to people, and it's got active fields in it so they can check boxes in it, and it has tests in it so you can enter numbers, and then you can take those back and you can put and manually insert the data into an Excel processor. And I think it works. It probably could use some exercising to make sure I didn't make a mistake someplace. The equations are not complex, but they're complicated. So
Okay.
anyway,
Yeah, because I have those.
yeah, but so far, people have not liked doing that. Apparently, you can do a thing with SurveyMonkey, and I think Ann Cochette has done a thing with Google something.
Yeah.
My
Google
friend
Forms.
Jonathan's doing something with Google something.
Yeah.
I'm not inclined to spend time on it. Meanwhile, Paul Hawkins really took this stuff to heart. He's got a company. He's a really interesting guy. His company's moniker is Crazy Might Work. Guess what color he is? What do you think?
Blue.
Blue. Anyway, he's got a working system and he's willing to sell it. And I think, Larissa, you guys can contact him and see what kind of deal he'd make with you. I think, Larissa, I always made this free to students and universities. It was always
Sure.
free for them.
Yeah, thank you, Charlie. Will do.
But I think this tool does several things. The first thing it does is it shows something's really happening, this data. People who use this on average get better, and they like doing that. It makes them feel good. I did a talk, a lot of talks around the world for PMI, Project Management Institute, and they flew me to first class to Brazil, to Australia, various places. And I made a deal with them that I would do a keynote talk, what they hired me to do a one-day workshop the next day, but they would charge for, and the revenue for that would be enough to mostly reimburse the cost of my travel. So this was a win-win formula. Everybody liked it. I contacted people after the fact and said, how's it coming and doing this work? And what they said was, oh, we had someone else next month. We already forgotten about you. So I thought this is a waste. So I quit doing this. I just said, thank you. I'm not interested in being an entertainer. I'm more interested in creating something useful. So I got a call from the PMI headquarters in Washington, D.C., wanted me to make a talk there. I said, sure. And they said, how much do you want us to pay you? I said, well, my normal fee for a keynote is $5,000, but I'll do it just for travel money. PMI has been good to me. It's a domestic trip. It's no big deal. I fly to Washington, stay overnight, do the thing, come home. So I got up, made the talk. And as I'm leaving, I hung around the conference for a couple of hours. Getting ready to go, the lady that was the president walked up to me and handed me a check for $5,000. I said, what's this? I said, I told you there's no fee. She said, I wanted to pay you. She said, I've been in this business 40 years. This is the first HR, the first intervention I've ever seen that actually did anything. So anyway, this works. If you can get people to buy into it. The one factor you cannot control is whether the team leader wants to do this or not. And sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But if they don't buy into the idea, it's going nowhere. That's just how humans work. So they've got to want it. And if anybody needs me to make a talk with somebody, I can do it to help persuade them. But what's worked for me, I've never been able to actually convince everyone in the room unequivocally this is going to work. And the reason is they have no experience with anything else working. So I don't fault them for that. But I can always convince the team leader to benchmark their team. That I would love to have done it when I was at NASA. And team leaders, I like them because they're the ones that are dealing with the results. In your case, Nat, it might be the owners of the company, but they're the ones that are going to sink or swim based on the results they deliver.
Right.
To whoever, the customers, and then ultimately, if they have stockholders or stakeholders or investors. So they're usually motivated to give this a go. And when they do the online tool and they see that it does something useful to them, usually they're hooked. So it's much, so I when I talk for an hour and then some blue in the room must argue back with me, I say, wait a minute, we can talk for 2 more hours and I might persuade you. Or, you know, it's kind of like trying to convince someone riding a bicycle is fun. Or you can get on the bike and pedal. So you can get on and pedal for 15 minutes and be done and find out for yourself. So that metaphor usually, so they agree to this. Once they do this, I'd say 95% of them want to continue on with the work because that they got it, that it's actionable, it's useful. The tool is probably the #1 marketing tool for this work.
Yeah, this is great. Thank you, Charlie.
So there we are. Move on.
Sure.
Yep.
So I think to me, it's intuitively obvious. By the way, I would not stand by these numbers if I didn't have consistent, many anecdotal reports from team leaders and team members that everything advanced with those numbers to the good. In other words, I wouldn't stand on the numbers without that corroboration. But I try and give someone some intuitive sense of what's happening here. So imagine the team that benchmarks in the red. There's no appreciation. There's nothing but criticism. This would have characterized the Hubble team or the Challenger team. There's no interest in shared interest, so there's no alignment about what to do. And the exclusion of people, and we've talked about how social exclusion is such a easy thing to unintentionally do, makes people mad. And with broken agreements, there's no trust. There's no addressing unfortunate realities with 100% commitment. Instead, there's blind optimism. And they're full of drama, blamers and complainers. So I think for me, it's a pretty easy jump that this is going to be a low performance team. And contrast it with a team where people feel appreciated. And something else important happens with that environment. People are willing to tell the unfortunate truths when they feel appreciated. If we had appreciated the PerkinElmer team differently, I don't mean me personally, I mean the whole NASA institution, even more important, the project office managing them, for their accomplishments as much as rain on them for the things that were happening to cause them to overrun. I think somebody would have said, "You got time for a beer? I want to tell you about that mirror." If that happened, I sure as hell would have done something. And they're aligned. Shared interests are being addressed. People feel included. That reduces this anger. They trust each other. How important is trusting? They address reality with 100% commitment. And instead of being stuck in drama, they're responsible. So this is persuasive to me. Is this persuasive to you, that you can see a difference in?
Yeah, the one thing I'm chewing on a little bit, and it may not directly relate to this, it may be somewhat to the side, is like, what's the motivation to begin this journey, right? You have to maybe, I guess, identify that there's a problem.
So here's what the way this seems to work. The teams that are doing really well, they're drawn to this. They'd like to do better.
Yeah, right.
It's
High
an
performance
easy
teams.
sell with them.
Yeah.
The teams that are doing badly, if they're stuck in the bottom quintile, they're going to resist the work, and rightly so, because they're not going to benefit from it. So what you need to do is the diagnostic again, to look at simply you're in the bottom quintile, put down your list of the 7 deadly sins, and anybody that wants, I'd help them with this, but I'd look at what's the nature of the issues in selling solar panels. The ones I wrote are more like, what are the issues in building flight hardware? So I'd modify them.
Okay.
Set it down in front of the leader and say, which of these are in play here? And they can tell you. I mean, I never had to say, this is what I think. I just showed them a list and said, tell me what's in play. And,
Right.
and they'd say, well, you know, the resources are grossly inadequate, or it's technically impossible, or we have an organization that doesn't work, or in the case of space systems, system engineering doesn't function. And so they know what the problem is. So why didn't they deal with it? Well, there's nobody there helping them with the tools to do it. Nobody giving them advice. Everyone's
Right.
caught up in busy, aren't they? Isn't that the chronic disease of our time, is excess busyness? So and it can be difficult to confront unfortunate realities, and they try and, you know, expression is kick the can down the road, wait for a better day, etc. So
Yeah, I see a lot of can kicking.
I think if you get them to do the 15-minute thing and then
Okay.
identify the issues and then help them resolve them, the resolution of these things is not usually hard. This is not general relativity or quantum mechanics. It's like,
Right.
this is a presenting problem. How do we address it? You do that, and when you do that successfully, you can remeasure 2 or 3 months later, and you'll see the improvement. And this usually gets people's attention. It's just data, and
Right.
you can't manipulate it. It's people are telling you what they see.
Yeah.
So I think that's the methodology that I've grown to like with this.
Got it. Thank you.
And so this is fairly recent meaning like a couple of years ago. I was mulling over the fact that Frank Martin and I are different than the other people in NASA today. And we talk about this occasionally. We're really focused on getting the job done, whatever it takes. That's kind of where we live. And we both got that from Apollo. We were both in NASA in the Apollo days. And now people are much more focused on social things, equal opportunity, the union, you name it. I don't know. The things that they're not bad things, but they're distractions from the main goal of getting the job done. And we didn't have time for that stuff back then. So what I realized was that the social context you put people in affects them. And we have a green social context. So almost every manager in my division after I left got a bigger job. So the social context of the organization apparently helped them. And if you run a red social context with all that crap, drama and blind optimism, and people get used to that, you're damaging people. You're doing something much worse than limiting team performance. If you put people in these places, the expression is don't put good people in bad places. You're gonna hurt them. So that's even to me a bigger impetus to go fix this, and it can be fixed. If the team leader wants to do it, you can fix it. It's just behavioral habit change. So I could take a team from the bottom to the top that really bought into the thing. I could take them up to the top quintile in 18 months. And people say, well, that's a long time to change habits. I don't think that's a long time. I think that's pretty much light speed. So it can do it. And so several teams I worked with were flight projects. I'm talking $500 million projects that were on the brink of being terminated because of their problems. And 18 months later, they're being held up as models of management. Comments, questions? What about this? Can you literally put people in places that are slowly destroying them and let that persist when you don't have to?
I mean,
Yeah.
you can, you're not going to be successful, right? And I think that's pretty clear. At what point do you normally start to introduce red social context versus green social context?
It's in the report.
Okay.
Yeah, it's in the report.
So once they do the TDA.
I have a static image in the report that
Okay.
hadn't been updated in a long time. I'm not sure it's quite as crisp as this, but it's there. And the first page of the report says, here's what it means to be in the two extremes. So
Okay.
take a look at where you are. And so to me, when your numbers are low, your performance is going to be low. But I find it useful to show somebody this is kind of what we're talking about. This is what the two ends of the scale look like. And I'm trying to build an intuitive argument. People who work in this field want to do some kind of data thing. I don't think you frankly can. I think the problem is, again, the term confounding variables. Do you know what I mean by this? So people said, I want you to show me numbers that you show profitability as a function of these numbers.
Oh,
okay. And I said, okay, so I've got to get into like how your company runs finances, how your product is positioned in the market. When the lending laws changed and your market changed, that would change the data. How to incorporate that in the data? So I don't think it's possible. There's too many
right.
confounding variables. So
Okay.
So and if I think if I did the numbers, no one would believe them anyway because there's too many ways to criticize them. So I don't bother. I say, can you see this? Looking at the two extremes, is it clear? I mean,
Yep.
You can deny climate change. What happens when you can't go swimming in Florida because your body can't reject the heat of seawater? Does that tell you something's going on here?
Yeah.
So the individual tools, I realized I'd left these out. Paul Hawkins asked me about this. I just hadn't talked about them. The reason is I'm so enamored with the team results, but it's exactly the same thing, except it requires about individuals' behaviors instead of team behavioral norms. And we use them with telephone coaching. This works really well. I had 8 master certified coaches and 3 past presidents of International Coach Federation on my coaching team. And I think one of the things that working with the tool, It's like my example, this lady that was habituated in drama and that didn't show up in the coaching sessions. You get real data from the workplace to work with. And the second is that you can track and record progress. The progress with IDAs for an individual is much more scattered. You're averaging over one person instead of averaging over a whole group. And it's much more affected by the ebb and flow of their lives. Like their numbers might change because they're having a divorce. It has nothing to do with work, but changes how they show up at work. Who knows? But it's definitely the slope is there. And I did something really interesting. I built an algorithm. So I took coaches' IDAs over a year. And most of them are coaching, I don't know, a dozen to 15, 20 people. So I had lots of data. And I would look at their average change with averaged over all the clients per coach per year. And if people were subpar, I got rid of them. So the beauty of that is I could actually say to people, I can guarantee you my coach on average is going to be effective because they're all women in the end. I've measured them and I've benchmarked them. So show me someone else that has coaches that are showing you some measurement as to how effective they are. I've got it. So I did it because I was interested in it, but it was a wonderful marketing thing. And finally, the IDA curve is obviously different than the TDA curve. And I think for a while I wondered about this, but I think people behave better as individuals than in groups. All you gotta do is watch what politicians do when they're out with their constituents and how they behave when they're back in Washington. Or I think I like to use this one. You're going to have your anniversary dinner. Would you rather have it in a restaurant with 20 tables of couples or next to a table with 40 people? I mean, what happens when people get at a table together and eat dinner? They become raucous, obnoxious. So that's the benchmarking curve for IDAs. And it's much more like a normal distribution. It's significantly different because we behave differently. And that's I don't have a better explanation for this than that we behave better one-on-one than we do when we're behaving in groups.
And the IDAs are not the individual filling it out, it's being filled out by others about
Other
that
people,
person. Okay.
you're right, the team is team members and they're commenting on the team's behavioral norms. This is how I would see Nat's behaviors, my impression.
Yeah.
And when people put these together, I say there's how you should select participants is you should find people who can comment knowledgeably. They might be people from a prior job, might know you better. It might be family members, and I would always include a partner or spouse.
Okay.
And brief the thing with them.
Yeah.
I think it's if you got the guts to do that, it's going to make your relationship better. Bring in some unfortunate realities. I had our architect was breaking agreements right and left, and I called him up one day and said, if you can't stop this, I'm going to terminate this whole effort and I'm going to go buy a house and remodel it. I cannot work with you like this. He was shocked. And we spent about an hour talking about this. And I said, you got to start showing up when you say, and you got to start being more present. I can't go 5 days without hearing from you when I ask a question. So he took it very well. And he told me later, he told his wife what happened. And I was curious to what she said. What would you guess she said?
She probably agreed with the assessment.
He said, it's about time someone told you that.
Yeah.
So the next segment is going to be going to the closure, and I'm going to do a little I think it's really useful, a little kind of review.
Great.
And then we're going to basically close it out with some just data and things. So there we are.
Wow. What a journey. Thank you for doing this.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
It's a lot of fun, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah, it is.
it's nice to have additional tools to solve problems, right?
Yep.
It's like when I look at my career, it's like you find a problem, you solve it, so you feel better about it. But these are the types of problems that I really have struggled to have a framework to work through it.
Well, and the language. You know,
Yes.
I mean,
Yeah.
so one difference is in physics, we have a common language. There's probably 10 different ways to do calculus. We all use Newtons.
Right.
And we all talk about those terms. We don't use, Feynman has one, Leibniz had his own variation on it. So, and science physicists universally agree on what entropy is and enthalpy, and we
Right.
can talk about these terms. I can go any place in the world and sit down with another physicist and we communicate instantly. We know exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Social world has no such things.
Right.
Whereas like culture, what does that mean?
Yeah.
That people use in 20 different ways, or on and
Right.
on and on. So I think one of the really important things about this is don't bring in other systems. Find the common vocabulary, use it to talk to each other about these matters, and deal with these invisible social context fields.
Right.
Yeah. I always enjoyed it every time when I'm present or when I'm a member of your assistance team or in any capacity, a learner or just witness or participant. I'm always enjoying it.
Thank you, Larissa. It's your
Thank
pleasure
you.
too.
Yeah, it's nice to nice to finally be all the way through this and see the things start to connect, making those connections.
People are really impressed when I tell them you reached out to me after, what's it been, 35 years? No, let me think, not that long.
Not quite. No,
30
it's
years, 28,
yeah.
28 years.
Yeah.
That's
It was just one of those things. So I'm very glad I did. And this has been a wonderful journey.
10 o'clock.
10 o'clock.
10 o'clock.
See you next week.
See you
Yeah.
next week.
Actually,
Thank you.
we may be traveling, but we'll let you
Okay.
know ASAP. That way.
If we have too many absentees, we'll talk about sailboats or something again.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll try to let you
Or
know as
something.
soon as we can.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Be well.
ABT,
Okay.
anything but Trump.
All right.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.